I'm a feminist, but the first time I ever got to meet today's guest, Mary Beard, I had to pretend to be way cooler than I was because inside I was doing a massive fangirl and outside I was just being like, sure, chill, we're just equals, Mary Beard. And we had to do something at the British Museum where both of us gave our thoughts on ancient relics. And we both made videos for this for an exhibition about the feminine, divine, and demonic. And there were loads of other people, not loads of other people. There were just sort of 5 other people, I think, who did it as well. And I had to just go in and just look at things and go, yes, this reminds me of this, or this is my feeling about that. And then so people would go along and they'd see my video, and then they'd see Mary Beard's video, and I was just like, lol. Because, I
love it.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. And I think they did want sort of, people's contemporary take, about things as well. But I just thought a whole different league. It was a great, great honour to be able to do that. And I can't wait to meet her today.
Oh, I love it. I'm a feminist, but apart from TaskRabbit, without which I don't think my home would even have any doors.
Do you feel that you call up a rabbit and say, hello, rabbit, would you come and fix my door?
Well, it's not a rabbit, is it? It's a man.
Oh, well, it could be a woman.
It's a man that can build your flat pack for you.
I'm a feminist.
It can be a woman, but I'm yet on my scroll to find a single woman on TaskRabbit. My son wouldn't have his scooter that he got for his birthday if it weren't for TaskRabbit.
What, because the TaskRabbit put it together?
Yeah, because I didn't even open the box. I just knew, for me, that is... well, not just a 2 to 3 day job in what took him under an hour, but also the stress it would have caused me would have taken definitely minutes off my life. And I thought it's not worth it.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that. And
it costs more to have a man come round and build it than it did for the scooter, which is embarrassing.
Oh God, that is embarrassing.
Yeah,
but also it gives somebody local a job who likes doing that, because I know people who do TaskRabbit because they're like, I don't have to work for anyone else. I do my own thing. I set my own hours. They're like acting or writing, and they just go, okay, I need a couple of jobs today, and they go off and do it.
It's great.
I feel like I'm a feminist, but now I feel like I'm a better feminist than you, because in the time it took you to tell that story, I looked on TaskRabbit under flat pack assembly, and the 15th person came up was a woman. Okay, I admit there's no other women doing flat pack assembly on the app as I scroll now. There will be loads, but...
I'm a feminist, but I think I live in a less feminist area of than you in terms of TaskRabbit. Okay, I'm
scrolling, there's still only one woman.
Female availability.
There's still only one woman.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not good. It's not good. Women, we need to get out on TaskRabbit. Is this okay? Minor home repairs. Let's see what we've got here. Let's see. This is me desperately hoping to find.
Come
women.
on.
Come on. Oh, it's doing its little buffer. It's doing its little buffer thing. Come on.
Do you remember, in the early days of this podcast, where there used to be a challenge, and then realised actually, if you're going to do these this frequently, how can we ever do one of our challenges could be. To put ourselves on TaskRabbit and make ourselves available.
Yeah, I mean...
to build somebody's flat pack. But put ourselves on... I'd put myself on as so cheap that not only would I get chosen straight away, but that it would be fine if it took me 9 hours to build someone's
Well, that's the thing. And these people are charging...
And a lot of swearing and crying, spitting.
People don't want to pay for that. They don't want to pay for that. They want someone to come in and do it who could do it in an hour, so they only get 1 hour or 2 hours, pay.
It's awful, but... That'd also get such a bad review. You'd never have to do it again. This would be a one-trick challenge.
You're right. I can't find anyone doing minor home repairs. This is extraordinary. Wow.
It is extraordinary. TaskRabbit.
Wow. Okay, women. We need to get more women on TaskRabbit. I can sort of see though why sometimes women don't want to just go to a random's house and go into their house and then build their IKEA table / fix their window. Without any protection. Where if you work for a company, there are definitely companies. There's a company I think called Big Strong Girls. Is that right? Or was that a TV show?
Oh, I don't know. That sounds cool.
There are definitely companies that do it, but I think with company you've got a bit more protection. And so maybe that's what it is, or maybe someone can write in and tell us.
I'm a feminist, but I went to see Arsenal ladies play live at the Emirates against Aston Villa. I don't know if you're meant to say live. I don't know if you're meant to call half-time an interval. I don't know if you're meant to describe yourself as sitting in the audience. But I did all those things. But mainly I'm a feminist, but throughout the 90-plus minutes, the majority of my thoughts, over half of my thoughts, weren't necessarily about the game.
I 100% feel you on that.
It was I went with my girlfriend's son and some friends, and my girlfriend's got a big crush on Rachel Daly, and it was funny because we were sat down the Arsenal end, so her constant commentary on what Rachel was up to, as opposed to wherever the ball was that was the main figure of fun. But it was distracting.
I'm a feminist. But
That's bad, isn't it?
I'm a feminist, but I went to the football and spent most of the time just
think about bums,
seeing the footballers.
Yeah,
that's
just thinking, God, look at that bum. God, look at that one's bum. Oh my God, look at that one's bum.
Well,
it's just 90 minutes of that.
They're so
it's great
that their bums are likely to
their
be.
Their bums are so
phenomenal.
great. They've all got great. There wasn't a bad bum on that pitch for the whole time, and there's so many substitutions.
I mean,
in
my world, all bums are great bums, but I do know what you mean.
Yes,
they're athletic, absolutely. Bums that you could pick up something in. You could.
Yes,
pick up
absolutely. Bums are going to hurt yourself if you tried to kick it.
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah. Joyful.
I'm a feminist, but on the football theme, I read that Eric Cantona, the footballer, was bringing out a live album. His debut album is a live album. And the BBC headline was Eric Cantona, the singer. This is his quote, "The Rolling Stones should support me." And all I could think was, wow, I'm going to die never having that kind of confidence. I won't have that confidence on my deathbed about, I'm just like, there's no, imagine as Eric Cantona, as in the 90s, Cantona.
Yeah.
French footballer.
Really famous for scissor kicking an audience member in the face.
Is he? Again, it's not an audience member, I don't think, but...
No, I think you are in the crowd. Yeah, they call it crowd.
But he, presumably a fan, but he thinks the Rolling Stones should support him. Isn't that fascinating?
Wow,
the Rolling Stones should support him.
I'm not sure I want that sort of confidence.
No, it's just more fascinating to me that anybody thinks that. That
incredible.
That anybody would have anybody ever would think that. I just was looking at him in awe, and it was both. I'm both repelled and drawn and magnetised in equal measure to a man who was famous playing football in the 90s. To be fair, he's an actor as well, but bringing out not just his first album, but a live album, which nobody does. Nobody brings out a first live album, not unless, I don't know, maybe they're a band member gone solo who already is a very competent, well-known musician. And
he'll be doing that next. He'll be saying Darren Brown should be supporting me on his magic tour.
He probably will. And I just looked at it and went, I'm so repelled by it, but also fascinated by it. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm just never going to have that kind of confidence. And what would it feel like? But it's a bit like, I think, what would it feel like to have a penis? It's just an abstract, interesting thought.
I'm a feminist, but I've recently caved and bought my son a £15 bottle of squash.
What?
I know. So there is a brand, I'm not going to say its name. It's squash. It's coconut water and squash that a rapper and a wrestler have brought out, and they have marketed to children, tiny children. And my son and all of his friends are obsessed with it. It's as much about collecting the flavours as it is anything. And they've started bringing out limited edition ones. And he's gone on and on and on and on and on and on. And I'm a soft touch. And I spotted one of these limited edition. I spotted two of them in town the other day on my way back from a meeting. And I thought, oh, why not? And I picked them up. I took them to the till. And the man He was embarrassed behind the counter, went, it's £30. I said, pardon? He said, it's 30,
Oh,
£30.
my God. How big is
I said,
it?
pardon? And he went, they're £15 each, like 500 mils.
No.
It's squash. And I said, pardon?
I thought you meant it weighed
in a moment of madness, I went, I'll just have one of them.
Oh.
I know. I thought, I'll just have one of them, and I've hidden it. It's going to have to be a Christmas present because I can't believe I've done it. And what's really tickled me is because all of my son's friends are all obsessed with this drink, there is a future episode of Motherland in how funny it is watching all of us guilty middle-class, seemingly lefty liberal parents acknowledge the fact that we've all caved and they've all tried it. And I had really good fun watching another parent the other weekend being like, he hasn't had this before. We wouldn't normally have this. Yes, you can have a sip. Yeah, right, have a sip and then put it away again. He won't be taking it into school, just so you know. We're all flapping, but we're also all caving.
I thought you meant...
And we've learnt that my integrity has got some bounds.
It weighed £15. When you said a £15 bottle...
No, it cost £15.
I thought you meant some ginormous...
For squash.
Yeah.
No, it's some massively overrated branded drink. Wow. I've refused to say its name.
I'm going to look it up, though, because I have to know. I'm a feminist, but I have to know what the branded squash is. I'm so sympathetic to you as a parent, though, because you just want to make them smile, and it's going to make a big deal to him. And whatever's the thing,
it's also not even as nice as that, Deborah. You want to make them shut up when they go on and on and on and on and on, day after day after day. Eventually, you go, yeah.
Wow, a limited edition squash. What world we're in?
I disgust myself.
No, it's not about you. It's just the world is insane. No, the world's gone. The world is wild.
Yeah.
From a variety of bedrooms and kitchens via Squadcast, the Spontaneity Shop presents The Guilty Feminist with me, Deborah Francis White, guest co-host Jessica Fostekew, and a very special guest, Mary Beard, talking about the Romans. This is The Guilty Feminist, the podcast in which we explore our noble goals as 21st century feminists and the hypocrisies and insecurities which undermine them. Our guest today has been described as Britain's best-known classicist. She is a Fellow of Newnham College, Cambridge, and Royal Academy of Arts Professor of Ancient Literature. She's very impressive. I feel a little intimidated already. Her new series, Being Roman, is coming soon to BBC Radio 4. Please put your hands together and make incredible woohooing noises for the wonderful Mary Beard. Oh, my God.
Oh, my crumbs.
Flattered.
Now, Mary, this is an absolutely gripping series that you've done about ancient Rome. And whenever I think of ancient Rome, I think of men. And did you know about this TikTok trend, Mary?
Look, I know a horrible lot about the TikTok trend, and I know that there are some blokes, and I think it is only blokes, who think about Rome, the Roman Empire, 3 times a day or 3 times a week. When I'm asked about this, I usually say that's nothing. I think about ancient Rome all the time, right?
These men are fucking slacking.
But, you know, when they say they think about ancient Rome, we know what they're thinking about. They're thinking about posh white men in togas or little military skirts. They are not thinking about slaves. They're not thinking about women. And, you know, one of the things we've been trying to do in this series of programmes is to say there are many more sorts of Roman out there. You know, some of those posh white men are, you know, I work on them. I find them quite interesting. But the point is, they're not the only thing that counts as Roman. And, you know, there's actually half the human race.
It doesn't start and end with Russell Crowe. Jessica Fostekew, how many times a day do you think about ancient Rome?
Why am I not aware of this TikTok trend? I don't think I've ever been aware of a TikTok trend
Mary
in my life.
Beard, would you please waste your extreme talents and intelligence?
Thank you, I'm so sorry.
Explaining to Jessica Fostekew the TikTok Roman trend.
There is a absolute viral sensation of a little TikTok vid, which started off with an influencer asking her bloke, how many times do you think about the Roman Empire? And he said, 3 times a day, 3 times a week. And this, not only did that that went viral, but also everybody else started making little TikTok movies of their blokes saying, "Oh, at least 7 times a month."
Oh, I love it.
And the question is, why? Why
it's got such a deep place in our psyche. I feel so. I don't think about it often enough. I'm going to think about it more, having heard a glimpse into this new series. We got taught in primary school. I'm sort of waiting. My son's just turned 8, and I'm waiting for him to get to this juicy stuff at school. It's the first time he's done any sort of history at all, and it's the Victorians they've started with. But I remember at primary school, that's when we got this stuff, the fun stuff. We got Romans, we got Egyptians, and then that was it. I don't think we got any ancient history again after that. We just did World War II about 9 times.
No, it's changing a bit, but that's the real problem. The really ancient stuff you feed to little kids, they get interested, but they never get a chance to learn about it again when they're kind of, perhaps a little bit more grown up.
Yeah.
So it kind of is slightly infantilized. And because it then does become Victorians, World War something, and I don't know, the Elizabethans.
Right? Yeah.
I went to school in Australia, and it seemed to be ancient Egypt and Gallipoli, Anzacs in the First World War, over again and again and again on a loop. Essentially, that's my memory.
Yeah. This is partly what this show is trying to, to put right, to fill in some of the bits that you didn't do at school. And of course, all the stuff that you've forgotten. You remember a few things from when you were 8, but not all that much.
No. And perhaps that is, like you say, infantilized version of it. And also, the starry, sexy, gory version of it, ironically. It's like we've got a pretty low bar there. Whereas... And you certainly just don't hear anything that happened to women at all. And it is there. So much of what has been found, am I right in this? Absolutely correct me if I'm not. But what has been found has been written down by men. So I feel like from what we've heard, the little glimpse we've been allowed into this series, which I'm so excited about. But it does feel like you are getting often a husband's or an ex-lover's or a man's version of a woman's story. Even now is all we've got to go on.
I think it's true that what we really miss, not entirely, but very largely, we miss a woman writing her own side of the story. Now, some of those accounts did once exist. The Emperor Nero's mum wrote her autobiography. Sadly, it has not survived, but my goodness, what a read that would be, but all the same, if you get your kind of mind into gear and to say, look, I'm looking for the women that are doing interesting things, even if you are seeing them in part through the eyes of men, which, hands up, that's what in part you are doing, very largely are doing. There are still women's stories there that you can tell. You can still get a sense of, battling women, feisty women, women who are actually operating in the world, which the traditional blokish story does just miss out. As I say, I'm a classicist, and I think some of that blokish story is actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
I've sort of spent my life in, studying it. But it's not the only story that there is. And that's what we're trying to get over. There's different stories from the Roman world about ordinary people as well as about posh people, and about women and slaves as well as free, influential men.
On that note, in one of the episodes we've heard, was there a blurred line sometimes between a slave and a wife?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. And one of the characters in this series is a woman called Regina, who's a girl from near St Albans originally. And we have all we know about her is her tombstone, and her tombstone put up by her husband tells us that he is the loving, grieving husband, but she was once his slave. He had freed her and married her. And that is not uncommon in the Roman world.
The same St Albans that's now sort of the forefront of the Tory belt, just above London?
It is.
Amazing.
This is a woman called Regina. She's a name, she means Queenie, really. She's not Queenie. She marries her ex-owner, who's a Syrian. He's from Palmyra. So, you start to see kind of in Britain, and they end up near Hadrian's Wall in South Shields. And you can start to see the sort of the ethnic diversity, but also you start to put the women back in. So one tombstone at a stroke reminds us that there was this guy from Palmyra, perhaps serving in the army there. It's hard to know. And he's married she's not actually an Essex girl. I'm afraid she's a Hertfordshire girl. But she's married them after being freed. He must have bought her at some point.
But to frame that compassionately, we're seeing a brutal enslaver who believes he can own a person, then quote unquote free that person, stop enslaving that person, and then say, actually, I want you sexually. And would we not now look at that and say, is that woman not being sexually assaulted continually by a man who's enslaved her?
That is the central point at issue, really. And I think that I think he probably didn't start sleeping with her only after they got married.
I was going to say.
Slave.
But then in that case, he was not sleeping with her, he was raping her. So
You might, The background. I mean, we know about this woman from about 15 words of Latin. Right?
Wow, right.
And of course, what we're doing is we're always filling the story.
We're filling in the blanks,
And we fill it in very different ways. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting is this tombstone was found in the 19th century. And when the first archaeologists looked at this, they told a completely different story from what we tend to tell. Here was this beautiful temptress from Hertfordshire who won the heart of the Syrian guy who became passionately involved with her because he fell in love, right?
To be fair, that's how the Daily Mail would sell it now.
And so you've got, and that's a very, very strong version of how this story is told. We tend to do exactly what you just did, Deborah. We tend to say, look, this is about exploitation. And of course, this is where whose side of the story we have makes a difference, because we've got his side of the story put up in loving tribute to the ex-slave, then wife, who has died. We have no idea what her side of the story is.
I can take a stab, though. I can take a good guess that if you're enslaved by somebody. And am I also imposing a contemporary value because a woman who, if your only economic advancement is marriage,
It's a big old step up. Equally, marriage at the time was being owned. It was just another type of being owned.
Yes, you could say it was one sort of slavery to another. But I think why these things are so interesting are partly because they do pose these dilemmas for us. You have to say, am I imposing my view here? It's very easy to see how these guys in the 19th century were over-romanticising this. We can see their very dubious assumptions. I mean, but then you have to say, well, what are my assumptions about this relationship? And we have no idea how she came into slavery. And one way it might have happened is she might have been sold by mum and dad.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, that's not an unparalleled way of being enslaved. So you have, and I think I do to some extent, have in my mind a very brutal form of slave market with human commodities being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Now, it's not impossible that that's how Regina ended up being owned by Barates, is his name. But it's also possible that she fell into slavery in much less kind of stark ways, that, he picked her up. Mum and Dad sold her, that it was a private deal or whatever. Now, that doesn't make it any better, but it just complicates the picture a bit.
Mm-hmm. Was enslavement always as brutal as it was? Because I think we get a lot of our picture, most people do, I'm sure you don't as an historian, but most people get our picture of enslavement through America.
America, yeah.
And the brutalities of American enslavement and the legacy of that to this day. Was Roman enslavement like that, or was it various things? Could it have been servitude, and could it have been also as brutal as what happened in America?
It's various things. It's various things. I mean, the crucial thing is there is no racial divide in slavery in the ancient world. So, I mean, if a Roman thought of a slave, close your eyes, think of a slave, he was probably going to think of a redhead German, rather than a black African. So you haven't got that sort of obvious racial division, and that makes, I think, a big difference. But I think it comes in all forms. I mean, the kind of slavery we know least about is probably the most brutal. The slaves who were agricultural slaves, or the slaves who were working down the mines. And I would be very surprised if that was any less brutal than what we assumed from the American South. The slavery we know more about is urban domestic slavery. And there is still a kind of commodification. It is an appalling commodification of a human being. But it usually has an end point that most domestic slaves are freed. So Regina on Hadrian's Wall was not unusual in being freed. She probably wasn't unusual in being married. And
this says so much about my level of maturity, but it's more of a Dobby the house elf situation at times.
Yeah. But I think that it's very, very hard to know how to nuance one's disapproval. I mean, nobody's going to say, this is a fine thing. Oh, it's super. It was just... some people did used to say, it's just a bit like being a 19th century domestic servant. No, it wasn't. You were not free. And I think one of the most extraordinary bits of actual, not violent, but sort of personal brutality that I know about slaves is the habit of rich Romans of giving their slaves away as presents. And that's where I start to see really what the impact of slavery is. It's not actually the violence. I'm sure there was some deplorable violence, but it's the sort of situation, we have plenty of evidence for it, of a master saying, "Oh, that's been a lovely dinner party we've had. Now, do take the slave home and have him as yours." Now, that's where you think I'm coming up against a sort of turning of a human being into an object in a way that is really, really vivid.
And if that human being had relationships in that house, or their son was working in another part of suddenly they're gone and they don't get a chance to say goodbye because they're like a parting gift, like, or take a bottle of wine with you.
It is take a bottle of wine with you, or a kind of party. In your party bag, you'll find a human being. Yeah. And that human being has not been consulted, can be shipped off wherever their owner decides.
And again, in terms of how anachronistically we imprint our current, in terms of all the things we've been talking about, even now, even a post-Me Too moral sensibility onto hearing these stories and learning about these lives. But in terms of that, the gifting of we wouldn't even treat animals like that in our lives now, and we look look at farming like that and think, no, you can't separate them from their, isn't that's how far we've come in a way.
I do, but we do treat animals like that though. Like we just slaughter them. And we take
No, but I mean, increasingly there's a movement to say that the personness of animals is like, you can't do that. How can you, that part of some reasons why people might not eat meat is because as part of that process in farming, it requires taking an animal away from its family or whatever. But, I'm just saying it's so complex. We certainly wouldn't treat a pet like that.
You wouldn't say we
take the cat home. You've been, thanks for being such lovely company. Please do take a puppy.
That's right. At the end of the dinner party, you say, oh, we've got some lovely kittens here. Don't anybody want them? That would not seem. On the other hand,
Deborah's nodding because she'd love that to happen to her.
I'm just saying, it's what we do. We go.
Do you think?
A friend has a litter of puppies and says,
yeah,
"Would you
I
like
suppose.
one?" And we go and get it. We bring it home.
Yeah.
To be fair, cat mothers start shunning their baby, so it's not like my cats are like, "Where's my mum?" I'm not suggesting that for a second. I'm just clarifying.
My cats are very much like, "Where's my mum?" And one of them's lying there right now, trying to behave as if I'm its mum.
Sorry, Mary, we veered off.
Sorry, Mary, this does happen. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. I'm going to force my way back into the conversation.
Please.
Sorry, this is not about puppies or kittens. I'm so sorry. We've derailed feminism for kittens. This is embarrassing.
I think that you two are just a little bit falling into the idea that things have got better.
Okay.
And I mean, it's very common, with both in school teaching and in university teaching, you can start to talk about Roman slavery, or you can go round Roman slave quarters with a group of students in a Roman house. You can see what it looks like, and you say to them, "Would we do this now?" And they say, "Oh no, oh no." So confident in the idea of human progress. And you say, well, don't you think there are some people? What is modern slavery? Are there anybody in our world who is living like this? Well, yes, there are. And where do you think your smartphone is made? And by whom is it made? And again, I think one of the payoffs from looking at the distant past is it really does help you look at yourself, and you think, we're different from them, but are we better? And what is someone in 200, 2,000 years' time going to say about how we behave? So I think looking at the Romans is interesting in itself, but it partly puts you on the spot about your own behaviour.
I've literally just written about this in my book, Mary. So when you read my book, as you inevitably will, because I'll send it to you and force you to read it so you can give me a quote. I don't want you going, she got that from me, because I can send it to you literally as we get off the phone. So you can go, she did, she's already written that.
I love it that you slipped that in there.
I need to clarify, because I don't want Mary Beard to think I'm plagiarising.
I just like I've got from what you just said, Mary, this idea of a timeline in children's histories classes in 2,000 years' time, where we start with the ancients and their types of slavers and Baratis, and then they'll skip straight to Andrew Tate.
Yeah, and we'll also skip to care homes, won't we?
Yeah.
We'll say, what did we do with the frail elderly? And I always think it's very, very good. It's a good prompt always to say, what will people in the future think we're so bad at?
Yes, yeah.
That is 100% the chapter of my book you're stepping on now, Mary. Now,
oh, I love it. Sorry, Debs.
I'm kidding. In fact, I would love you to read this chapter of my book before I publish it, because you'll say there's all sorts of things wrong with it for sure.
Never.
Hello, Guilty Feminists. This is Deborah. We're coming to the Soho Theatre in London for 4 nights only, starting on the 1st of November. So it'll be the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. These will almost certainly be our last live recordings of 2023, certainly in the UK. So please come and see the year off with us. On Wednesday, the 1st of November, I'll be joined by Alison Spittle. On Thursday, the 2nd of November, it's Sakisa. On Friday, the 3rd of November, the co-host will be Jessica Fostekew, and we will finish Saturday, the 4th of November, with Shaparat Kasandi. All shows are on at 9:30, and the bar will be open after the show. For tickets, go to sohotheatre.com. You can also get ad-free episodes of The Guilty Feminist from Patreon, Apple or Acast Plus, and we'd love it if you could find a moment to leave us a 5-star review and follow us in your podcast app. It really does help other people find the show. And now back to the podcast. You're such an icon, Mary. I'm just so constantly blown away by you. Could you tell us about Turia? Because I found you at one point say it was a real temptation for us to look at her as a mashup of Joan of Arc and Nancy Drew. But we're only hearing about her from her husband. But he wrote
this is quite unique.
Screeds.
Yes.
On her
He wrote a tombstone that was like a whole edition of Take a Break about their lives.
Yes.
Like a Wikipedia entry tombstone.
Yes.
It's what I'll be having.
Yeah. I mean, we have two women in this series, and one we have about 15 words on, which is Regina, and the other we've got columns and columns of stuff about her life written by her grieving husband, and it. Obviously, again, seeing it through his eyes. But he goes through, and it doesn't all survive, but enough survive so that we can get the picture. And we find her having this most extraordinary battling life. She starts off being engaged clearly quite well to the husband. Just before they get married, her parents are both murdered on their country estate. We have no idea what caused the murder, whether it was, a hit squad or, a domestic. No idea. And she has to kind of try to, on her own, because it's the middle of the civil wars at Rome, she tries to and succeeds in bringing the murderers to justice. Then she's going to inherit and have at least some kind of cash to live on. But her grasping relatives all start to come in, so says the husband, and try to challenge the will. So she has to deal with them to get the money. Then her husband, who keeps being on the wrong side in the civil wars, he gets exiled and doesn't have anything to live on. So she's kind of sending him her jewellery, keeping the show on the road so she can support him. Then there's a very nasty ruling junta in Rome at the time, and she goes in front of one of the men in the junta to say, I want my husband back. He should be able to come back home now. And she's successful, actually, but she gets bashed up. He turns the heavies on her, and she's beaten black and blue. And then the husband does come home, and they settle down in what ought to be kind of peaceful marriage, and he praises her in, terribly, terribly traditional Roman ways, after all this kind of daring do of her, the early career, she's modest and obedient and goodness knows what. Then, the end of the surviving bit of this tombstone, we hear about their fertility problems. They haven't got any kids. And in a traditional Roman way, of course, the fault is with the woman, right? That is fertility problems. Not entirely, but by and large, if you can't have a baby, it's because the woman can't have a baby. What she then does is say, because it's my fault, I so want you to have a family. Let's get divorced. And you can marry somebody else, and I'll kind of stay around as household manager, right? And look after your new wife and the kids. And we have a sort of threesome, but we won't be married any longer.
Did she really say that, though? Because I feel like that's very much a man's interpretation of what a woman said. Did she?
There could have been lots of ways in which she, in an empowered way, offered the idea of a throuple, but that could also obviously be his spin on either making up for cutting his own losses in terms of fertility or any other thing, any other failing on that his part for them to conceive. But equally, we Yeah, we just don't know. Or was there a third member and he's saying she was up for it? She was fine with it, by the way. Like, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's fine. A great excuse for the adultery that's already happening. I mean, that again is, I think, why these things are so interesting. Even when we've got lots and lots of words, as we have in this case, I think what is most fun to do and what you teach students to do when they're looking at this kind of thing is to say, can we start to imagine what the other person's side in this story was? Can we, we can't know what the background is. We can't know what the other person would have said. But I think the one thing we can at least do is to start to wonder and to say what different versions of this story might other people have told. And so you have always to take seriously, I think, the surface account. This might actually be the grieving, loving husband who is devastated by the loss of his wife, who has been a perfect partner to him in decades of loving marriage. That's what it claims to be, and that's what it might be. But you always have to say also, well, what if it wasn't quite like that? If you look at modern obituaries, when people, all the nasty bits, unless they're very, very obvious, tend to be smoothed over in the telling. In eulogies, you tend to make the best of things. You paint a happy picture. That's what eulogies do. Whatever the rows you had, whether that was about your childlessness or not, they don't appear on the tombstone. Right?
In the same way that, a marriage in itself was a more functional, political, social tool rather than something arranged based on who loved who, but feels like the sort of thing you'd put on a tombstone or in an obituary potentially would also have to serve similar purpose. Potentially there's what legacy is he choosing to leave here of her and of them? And also, you say in this episode that even for the time, it was quite eccentric to be that open about such personal matters. So there is a chance that he was potentially a bit of a card.
Yes.
Or genuinely behaving in a way that wasn't socially normal at all. So there is something either a bit fishy about his story when it comes to their fertility woes, or about his personality and perhaps his how neurotypical he was, all of these things. Who knows, what his reasoning was for being so against the grain when it comes to that openness.
I would not like people to go away and thinking that most Roman tombstones had this kind of level of intimate detail on them. Most of them, I'm afraid, sadly for the historian, don't. And you do wonder why. This is a one-off. It's the longest private inscription about anybody that we have from the Roman world, and it's a woman. But you think so, and you can't help but thinking, what's driving this? And the obvious question about fertility is, actually, maybe he couldn't get it up. Maybe that's the problem. It wasn't her fault after all, and he jolly well knew that there was something which pointed in his direction. And I don't think that those speculations are pointless. I think that history is about partly wondering what the other story would be, and I don't think that you. As long as you don't start to believe your version of the story as truth, I think it's terribly important to parade what a different version might be. I mean, the danger is when you start to believe in your own fantasies rather than think they're useful fantasies.
They're possibilities that if he was having fertility issues and he was saying, no, I would never... I didn't want another wife and I'd rather have no children. And also, I think it's hard for us to understand what no children meant then. It had a different implication and impact than it does now. Now it's much more emotional than, again, fiscal and political and all of those other things. Like in the Bible, it's incredibly important to have children, and people are renting their garments and, weeping in ways that aren't just about, I'd really like a baby. there about the
No,
line of the
that's right.
family and the God's not blessing me with a child and all sorts of things. But that's why then the tradition of the handmaid, as then rolled out in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, came about. It was a woman saying, well, I'll force my servant into having a baby and I'll raise it as my own. But interestingly, Turia said, no, you marry somebody else and I'll be the staff, which is extraordinary.
Yes.
That she didn't say, can't we
Yes.
adopt a baby or, surrogate a baby, but rather I'll become your housekeeper. If she did.
It would have been perfectly expected, I think, that you could just take the slave's baby. Interestingly, this is a time, this particular moment when this tombstone goes up, is when the Roman emperor is being very, very fierce on productivity of children.
Right,
He's trying to raise the birth rate. He's giving particular privileges, financial and political, to people who have 3 living children.
Oh.
So in some way, that kind of issue may lie behind this, that the husband is trying to say, I was doing my best, but, this was love. Right? It's done against the background of quite a fetish about having 3 children.
3 children was the thing to have, was it?
3 living ones.
3 living. And it didn't count the dead ones, I'm afraid.
The park was so shit. And as you say, the present is very shit in a lot of the world. We live in a blip of history and geography.
Yeah, and I think that one of the dangers of looking back at Rome and rightly seeing how shit it is, and it is absolute shit. Nobody. I think even a bloke probably really wouldn't want to go back to ancient Rome, and a woman certainly wouldn't want to do. The danger is that we do get a bit self-satisfied about progress and about how much we've come on, and of course, it's in parts of the world that is absolutely true, but there's some bits of our own society which Romans would find very odd. And despicable.
Which bits would Romans find despicable about us?
I think they would find what we do with the elderly despicable. And I think they'd feel that our penal system was the idea of incarceration.
Liberties being taken worse than death.
Yeah, Romans weren't kind of a load of liberal judicial reformers, that's for sure. But they didn't use incarceration as a punishment. Basically, it was a fine, exile, death, or a clip on the ear, really. And I think they would be completely baffled by the notion that we spent enormous amounts of money incarcerating people who came out of prison and went on to do the same thing again. They would just think this was crazy.
It is.
Well, it is. They'd be right.
When you put it like that.
There's a wonderful notice on the train that I go to London on from Cambridge. It's on the small first-class carriage, which there still is. It says something like, anyone with a standard class ticket found to be sitting in this carriage will be liable to a fine of, £1,000 or 6 months imprisonment.
It doesn't say that, does it?
It does, yeah. I've taken a photograph of it. And you think, I have no doubt that this penalty is almost never, if not never, enforced. But the idea that someone with a straight face could actually put up a notice saying that sitting in a first-class carriage when you've only got a standard class ticket could land you
6 months.
6 months in the neck.
What are you in for? Oh, I
sat in a slightly bigger seat. I got a free coffee.
had a doily on the back of the seat.
Yeah.
It was worth the risk. God, that's incredible. And is it a hangover from the Victorian? Because I always feel like the Victorians had workhouses and orphanages, and we got rid of most of those institutions. And, where they just sort of lock women up because their husband said they were insane or something like that. But the ones that have hung over really are prisons and elderly care homes. And I'm not saying, by the way, if you that all elderly care homes are horrendous places, but I'm just saying the idea.
Prisons.
I'm not saying that, but and if you are listening and you are in one and you are happy in one, or you work in one that you're. I'm not suggesting that for a second, but I am saying the idea of it that we farm old people into a building where they all live with each other.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it's, there are good care homes and bad care homes. And, I'm hoping very much that I end up in a good one. But
you've got children who will not, I would say... Aren't your children historians? Won't they acknowledge that this modern travesty?
We shall see. We shall see. But I, dream on, I think. But I think it is the idea that at a certain point you're farmed out. That you get put away with a load of other people your age, and you're not really seen about. You're not part of the community. You're in the care home. Now, as you say, Deborah, that would be to be very unfair on some of the best care homes that there are, which do not hide their residents away. But there is this sense that we take it for granted, that in the closing
that's just what
years,
we do. Yeah,
that's what we do. We put people somewhere else. But again, we tend not to hear Granny's side of the story. And I think with all these things, I mean, again, it is a bit like, thinking history helps you think about things from a different point of view. I can well imagine some cases where the last thing that you'd want to be done to have happening to you is being looked after by your ungrateful kids. So
it's really about choice.
It's a terribly difficult one, but there is a kind of sense that we, particularly as we got an ageing population, we haven't begun to work out what we think they are for, what they can contribute and how we can contribute to them. We've taken some very, very crude options.
Did you see that? It's not really a documentary. It's one of those Channel 4 experimental shows, to be honest with you. But it was they did a thing where they had children, like a small children's playgroup, come in and do their playgroup every day in an old person's home. And the children, at first, some of the old people were like, oh my God, this is going to be awful. But the last thing I want 3-year-olds around, 4-year-olds. But actually it became, and who knows, I mean, it was edited, so who knows. But it was very moving because you saw older people become engaged and young and playful, and you saw the children really bonding with the older people and asking questions the way, children ask very sometimes tactless questions. But then grown-ups know that the child is only 4 and will answer them. And it was really wonderful. And I just thought we should not be a lot of, I think, the reason that older people start to lose some of what they have mentally and physically is they are all together with other people who are in that same position and not with young people who are going, can you help me tie my shoe? Or what's that? Or could you read this to me?
Yeah, no, I think... It's something about the powerlessness of the elderly, and I think that's what would have puzzled the Romans, because in Roman culture, the people who had power in the city of Rome were the old, and in fact, if we talk about and people know
would the old have actually been quite a bit younger then?
Well, that's part of it. That's part of it, but not as much younger as we think. I mean, we know the phrase, we know about senators and the Senate in Rome. Everybody kind of knows that. Well, that actually means the old people. It comes from the word for old man. I mean, it's not the old women, guys. It's the old man.
Surprise.
I think it is quite interesting about how old you would be in Rome. Because up to a point, you're right, Jess, it's that there isn't in any sign in ancient Rome of kind of our burgeoning 80-plus demographic. That's true. But the idea that that you never grew old in Rome is wrong. It is true that the average life expectancy at birth was about 26. But that doesn't mean that most people died at 26. What it means is that 50% of people died before they were 10.
Yeah.
If you lived to be 10, you could expect a life expectancy that was not as advanced as ours, but more or less. There were plenty of 50 and 60-year-olds around the city of Rome. It's just that children died of childhood diseases, really, as I say, 50% by the time they were 10.
Crumbs.
Which is why when you're thinking about why having children is important, it's having living children that's important.
Oh, the past again is very grim, as you say, the present. What do you want people to take from this Radio 4 show?
I want them to take, two things in particular. First, that our standard image of the Romans. Close your eyes and think of the Romans. We know exactly what people see. Togas, military skirts, and white blokes yomping over conquered territory. Now, there's no doubt that's part of it, right?
There was yomping. Yomping went on.
There was yomping.
There was yomping, okay? Don't let's pretend otherwise. But actually the Roman Empire was full of all kinds of people that we often don't think about. People like our slaves, our women. One of our programs is about a middle manager in Roman Egypt who is trying to arrange a royal visit from the Emperor Diocletian. And, it's a bit like somebody now trying to arrange a royal visit of King Charles. There is enormous amounts to be done. You have to check the loos are all right and you've got enough food and drink and the transport arrangements have been done. And there's this poor old middle manager writing letter after letter, because they still survive, saying, you have not yet got the bakery up and running, and we're going to have a vast kind of influx.
So it's a series of emails from a middle manager.
It's a kind of the ancient equivalent of a load of emails, and you see
W1A Roman time.
Get this glimpse of some bloke who. The kind of bloke who's usually lost to history, not a really powerful admin man, a local administrator trying to do his best.
Just wondering if you saw, just bring it to your attention, just a nudge on.
So sorry to trouble you.
Well, and sometimes he loses it, and then he has to write up to his bosses and say, look, I've told them time and time again they've got to do this. So he's covering his own back. He's trying to get, the guys at the local level to refurbish the bakery, and you just see the sort of person that both seems quite familiar, but also is just not normally not seen. When we think about the Romans, we don't think about the history of admin, do we? And actually, there is that. Yeah. There's the doctor, a wonderful doctor who actually seems to have invented the first anal suppository in the West. This kind of stuff. Romans did all kinds of things, and so we're trying to kind of give people a glimpse of just the difference. But I think we're also trying to give them a glimpse of all the different ways you can find out about these people. I mean, we tend to think of the evidence for Roman men being in, rather serious works of Roman literature that survive, the histories of Tacitus, the histories of Livy, so forth. And that is terribly important. An enormous amount of that literature survives. But, as with the middle manager, we find that we've got the discovery of his kind of papyruses from his filing cabinet. And we've got Turia, who we know from fragments of her tombstone, which actually at some point obviously got bashed up because it's been found all over the city of Rome and it's been pieced together in a kind of big jigsaw puzzle. Wow. And there's similarly one of my very favourite of these characters is a little 11-year-old poet who performed in a big poetry competition at the end of the 1st century CE. And he didn't win, but he was highly commended. And then he soon after died, and his parents on the tombstone say, from hard work. Right? And here we've got his tombstone, on which they have written out the poem that he performed at the competition, so we can still see what he actually said. And that was only discovered because they put his tombstone up very proudly. It was then later used, recycled in the later Roman walls of the city of Rome. And it was found in the 19th century when those walls were demolished. And there was the tombstone of little Sulpicius Maximus holding his scroll, and with all this stuff about how he'd died of hard work. He was always, again,
it's just all people
children. I mean, we think of we've been saying that you don't hear about women, and that's true, and you don't hear about slaves. We hear very little about kids, except that they're sort of treated as if they were sort of just miniature grown-ups. And here on this tombstone, found in a demolition job in the late 19th century, here is the only poem we have written by a child from the whole of the ancient world. And it's, and you think, wow. I think when I go and see his tombstone, which is now in a... I thought you'd ask that, and I think the judicious answer is to say better than you might expect, right? Yeah. I don't think it'll be being set in classics GCSE, or A level, or on university courses.
What's it about, though? What's the poem about?
It is rather weirdly, he was given this subject to almost improvise on, and it's the story of the young tearaway Phaethon, who is the son of the god of the sun. And Phaethon persuades his dad, who's the god of the sun, to let him drive the chariot of the sun. But Phaethon is a stupid young tearaway, actually, and he can't control the chariot. And he nearly drives the chariot into the earth, which would have destroyed the earth. So the god Jupiter has to come along and zap Phaethon. So Phaethon is killed in order to preserve the earth from his bad driving. Because he was, in other words, he was a young boy who was trying to do rather more than he was capable of. And it's hard not to put that together a little bit with our boy poet, who was competing age 11 in an adult poetry competition, and perhaps he wasn't quite ready. And he was actually telling them the story of another teenager, almost teenager,
Art
who wasn't quite ready.
Life. Wow.
Art imitating life, and vice versa.
So it was in a grown-up poetry competition. Sorry, I thought this was a school thing.
No, it's not absolutely clear. It could have been a junior competition, but it was a major City of Rome competition. This kid was performing in front of 7,000 spectators and the emperor himself.
Wow.
And it certainly the implication that mum and dad give, and of course, they were a bit biased. The implication is that he was competing in an adult comp, and came away with a pat on the back from the judges.
I think you've got an absolutely fascinating job, Mary, and I think you do it absolutely brilliantly to translate it all for us in such an accessible way. Is there anything you came to say today that you didn't get to say?
No, I think that we've covered that. I mean, I think it is, I suppose my life's mission has been to encourage people to realise that the Romans aren't dull. They're not just boring old yompers. Some of them are, but they are a whole range of different people thinking about their world in a different way and leaving us their traces. We actually, we've got their tombstones, we've got their papyrus letters, and to some extent you have to sort of let those out from the university lecture room and share them with people and say, look, this is actually, everyone, this is really interesting.
Indeed. Jessica Fostekew, is there anything you've always wanted to ask Mary Beard but not been close enough to ask her?
No. This has been one of my favourite hours I've ever had. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%.
Just want to say thanks.
Thank you.
Jess, do you have anything to plug? Anything you'd like the audience to know about?
I'm going on tour throughout the first half of 2024 with a brand new show called Metal, and it's on sale. I would absolutely love to have Guilty Feminist listeners filling the seats of this tour, and it's a whopper for me in terms of I'm going to lots and lots of places, so hopefully I'll be coming somewhere very near you if you're listening. Please come and see it. I'm working real hard at the moment to make it very funny.
Amazing. I will totally be there. I'll be there with extra bells on. Mary, do you have an I'm a Feminist but for us? We'd love to hear a Mary Beard I'm a Feminist but.
I'm a feminist, but when I find a mouse on the kitchen floor, I scream and call for my husband and ask him to dispose of it.
Lovely.
Excellent. Absolutely thrilled. Has that happened recently?
Not recently, but several times in the course of our long marriage.
Have you jumped on a chair shrieking?
I run away. I just run away. Dead bird. I mean, when we used to have cats and they brought in not just mice, but pigeons, so there's this kind of sort of semi-dismembered carcass. I just think, man's work, this. If men are paid to do anything, is to clear up dead pigeons, dead mice, dead anything.
So is the truth is, Mary, you're a feminist, but you believe that the pay gap means that the excess money that men make, for that money, they also have to clean up any dead birds brought in by cats or mice that are in the house?
I think that's a very generous way of putting it, Deborah. What you're doing is you're making it seem kind of carefully and politically thought out. Well, actually, I'm just bloody scared.
It's too honest. It's basically like you're writing an overly honest obit. We're telling too much. You're not spinning it enough.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Mary, it's been wonderful to have so much of your time. And
that's great.
Mary, could you tell us again, what's the name of your programme and where can we listen to it?
The name of the programme is Being Roman, and it's 6 episodes on Radio 4 starting in November, but it's also available as a podcast on Sounds.
That's very exciting. And any books or anything else you want to plug while you're here?
I've got a book just out called Emperor of Rome, which looks at some of those posh Romans at the top. But instead of telling their biographies, what it does is it says, look, let's look at them and ask what the job description for being a Roman emperor was. What did they eat? Who did they sleep with? How did they travel? How many letters a day did they write? And it looks also not just at the guys at the top, because that's not what I do. It looks at all the people who kept the show on the road. Amazing. So we look at the Empress Livia's masseurs. We look at her handbag carrier. We look at the guy who is in charge of the napkins at the royal dining table. And we look at the guy who is in charge of all those tasters that you found around the royal dining room, not to taste if the food was any good or not, but to taste if it had actually been doctored with some nasty toxin. And there is a walk-on part for the anal suppository.
Amazing.
So that book is really about the yompers and those who made the yomping possible.
Yes. And the women, and, I'm afraid it has quite a lot about, lurid luxury, that's true. But it also reminds us that emperors did a hell of a lot of paperwork.
Great. Okay. Well, we look forward to reading that as well. Mary Beard, it's been an absolute honour and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have been listening to The Guilty Feminist with me, Deborah Francis-White, guest co-host Jessica Fostekew, and our very special guest, Mary Beard. The Guilty Feminist theme tune was composed by Mark Hodge and produced by Nick Sheldon. The producer was Tom Salinsky for The Spontaneity Shop. Thanks to Rachel Craftman, Gina Dicio, Zainab Mohammed, and everyone who made this episode happen, as well as all of you for listening. For more information about this and other episodes, visit guiltyfeminist.com.
You look perfect. You look like a perfect Roman.
Yeah, I spent all night in the vomitarium. I haven't. God, I've just been listening to your show, though. God. The past is shit, isn't it? The past is not a good time to live. I think that's...
No, when anybody ever says to me, would you must love the Romans. Would you like to go back to ancient Rome? And you say, no, thank you. Or at the most with a very definite guaranteed day return,
Yeah.
Guaranteed day return.
And an invisibility cloak and everything else.
And also to be a man. Don't have to go back as a woman, for sure.
No.
We should probably start because Tom might use this as a little funny bit, but I don't want anything else to get lost, before we started, because everything we say will no doubt be gold. The Guilty Feminist is provided exclusively from Acast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.